She was a young woman who had already seen more struggles in her life than many people twice her age. Her name was Grace, and though she never said much about her past, anyone who looked into her tired eyes could tell that her life had not been easy. Every morning, she walked into the grand mansion of one of the richest men in the city, carrying her small baby wrapped in a soft but worn cloth. She walked slowly, carefully, making sure the child did not wake. By the time she reached the mansion, the sun was just starting to rise, and she would begin her long day of work. Grace had been hired as a maid in the billionaire's home just a few months earlier. She was grateful for the job because it meant food, shelter, and a small wage that could at least help her survive. She was not like the other workers, who went home to their families at night. Grace had no family to return to, and no place to call her own. The little savings she once had were gone, spent on keeping her baby healthy and safe. When she was left with nothing, she still chose to keep moving forward because the child in her arms was her reason to live. Inside the mansion, life was busy but orderly. The marble floors shone like glass, the chandeliers glittered, and every room seemed larger than the small home she once shared with her parents. The other maids worked quickly, polishing, dusting, and arranging. Grace joined them with a quiet smile, never complaining, even when the work was hard. She was slower than some of the others because she had to keep her baby close, but she never asked for pity. If the child cried, she would gently rock him until he fell asleep again, and then she would return to her tasks. When night came, the others left, walking back to their houses where warm dinners and comfortable beds awaited them. Grace did not follow. Instead, she quietly found a corner in the servants' quarters, away from the eyes of the supervisors, and laid her baby down. There was no bed there for her, only the bare floor. She folded a piece of cloth to make a thin cushion for the baby, and then she wrapped her own shawl around herself and lay down beside him. The floor was cold, and her back ached, but she closed her eyes with relief because at least her child was safe in her arms. Each night was the same. Grace would whisper to her baby, telling him stories in a soft voice. She would talk about dreams she had, of a small home with a little bed just for him, of days when she would not have to worry about what tomorrow might bring. The baby did not understand her words, but he would smile when he heard her voice, and that was enough to give her courage. The pain of sleeping on the floor, the hunger that sometimes returned when she skipped meals to make the food last longer, all faded when she looked at his tiny face. The mansion itself seemed to mock her situation. Around her, rooms stood empty, filled with expensive furniture that no one even used. There were wide beds with soft pillows, carpets that felt like clouds beneath the feet, and warm fireplaces that were lit even when no one was there. But Grace dared not step into those places. She belonged to the servants' side of the house, and she knew the rules. She was thankful enough that she had work, and she did not want to risk losing it by asking for more. During the day, she often caught herself staring at the world outside the windows. Cars came and went, carrying people who lived lives she could only imagine. Women wore fine clothes, men walked with confidence, and children laughed without worry. Grace wondered if her baby would ever have that chance. She promised herself, silently, that no matter how hard her life became, she would fight to give him something better. That promise gave her strength when her body grew tired and her mind felt heavy with sadness. The other maids noticed her struggles but did not speak much about it. Some admired her quiet strength, while others whispered that she might not last long in such a demanding job. A few offered her extra food, which she always shared with her child first before eating herself. Grace accepted these small kindnesses with gratitude, though she never wanted to be a burden to anyone. She carried herself with quiet dignity, never asking for sympathy, only doing what she had to do to survive. The nights, however, were the hardest. The mansion grew silent, and the sound of her baby's breathing was the only comfort she had. Sometimes the child would wake in the middle of the night, crying from hunger or cold, and Grace would cradle him close, humming softly until he calmed down again. She often prayed in those moments, whispering to herself that tomorrow would bring something better, that the world would not always be this hard. In her heart, she held on to hope, because without it, she would not have been able to go on. She thought no one knew about her secret that she stayed behind and slept on the floor with her baby. She was careful, always waking early before the supervisors arrived, tidying up the corners so that no trace was left behind. She told herself it was only temporary, that one day she would earn enough to rent a small room and give her child a proper home. But until then, this was her reality, and she accepted it with the same quiet strength that had carried her through all her struggles. Grace's life was not easy, but she believed that love and sacrifice had meaning. Every smile from her baby, every little laugh, reminded her that the hard nights and long days were worth it. She did not know that soon, someone else would see what she was going through. She did not know that her silent sacrifices, hidden away in the corner of a mansion, were about to change not only her life but also the life of the billionaire who lived above her. For now, she simply closed her eyes on the hard floor, whispering a prayer for her child, unaware of the storm of change that was waiting to arrive. The night was quiet in the large mansion. Outside, the wind whispered through the tall trees, and the sound of crickets filled the air. The workers had already gone home, and the house seemed to sleep in silence. But inside, Grace was awake, cradling her baby on the cold floor of the servants' quarters. She rocked him gently, humming a tune her mother once sang to her. The baby stirred and let out a soft cry, and Grace quickly pressed him closer, whispering softly until he calmed down again. She was exhausted, her back aching, but she did not complain. She only smiled faintly at her little boy, thankful he was with her. That same night, the billionaire returned home much later than usual. He had been away for business, and though his life was full of wealth and comfort, his face showed signs of tiredness. He walked into the grand hallway, his footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Normally, he would head straight to his room, but on this night, something unusual caught his attention. There was a faint sound somewhere in the quiet house, a baby's cry. At first, he thought he was imagining it, but the sound came again, soft but clear. He paused, surprised. There were no children living in his house. The sound puzzled him, and his curiosity led him down the hallway. Slowly, he followed the cry, moving past the glittering chandeliers and polished doors until he reached the servants' side of the mansion. He rarely came here, but that night his steps carried him toward the small rooms where the staff stayed during the day. When he reached the corner of the servants' quarters, the sight before him made him stop. There, lying on the cold hard floor, was Grace. She had her baby pressed against her chest, wrapped in a thin blanket. Her body curled protectively around him, as if her arms alone could shield him from the cold of the night. The baby had just fallen quiet, soothed by his mother's soft humming. Grace herself was half asleep, her eyes heavy but still alert enough to keep watch over the child she loved more than anything. The billionaire stood still for a moment, staring. He was a man who had traveled the world, who had seen luxury beyond imagination, who had bought priceless things without thinking twice. But what he saw in front of him was something money could not buy. He saw sacrifice. He saw love. And he saw a struggle that pierced through his own heart. For a long time, he did not move. His mind filled with thoughts he had not allowed himself to feel in years. He had grown used to living in wealth, surrounded by comfort and success, yet he realized he had been blind to the quiet lives of those who worked for him. He wondered how many nights this young woman had slept here on the cold ground, hidden away in silence, while he rested in a bed large enough for 4 people, covered in blankets so soft that he never thought twice about them. The baby shifted and whimpered again, and Grace stirred, opening her eyes slowly. At first, she did not see him. She gently kissed her child's forehead and whispered, "Shh, it's all right, my love." Her voice was tender, carrying both strength and exhaustion. Then, as she adjusted the cloth around her baby, she noticed the tall figure standing in the shadowed corner of the room. Her heart froze. The billionaire's eyes met hers. For a moment, neither spoke. Grace quickly sat up, pulling her child closer as fear rushed through her body. She thought she had been discovered in her secret. She thought that tomorrow, she would lose her job, the only thing that kept her and her baby alive. "I'm sorry, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't mean to disturb anyone." Her words were filled with panic, but the billionaire did not respond immediately. He was still processing what he had seen. Instead of anger, his face showed something she did not expect: gentleness, mixed with a kind of sadness. He looked at the small space she had made her home, the thin cloth on the floor, the shawl wrapped around her shoulders. His heart ached at the sight. "You sleep here?" he finally asked, his voice low but calm. Grace lowered her head, ashamed. She clutched her baby tightly and nodded. "I had nowhere else to go," she admitted softly. "I didn't want to lose this job. Please, please forgive me." Her words cut into the quiet of the night. The billionaire stood in silence, his thoughts spinning. Forgive her? For what? For being poor? For trying to protect her child? He felt an unfamiliar weight pressing on him. He was a man known for making quick, firm decisions in business, but here, standing in front of a fragile young mother, he felt something shift inside him. He did not scold her. He did not send her away. Instead, he quietly turned and left the room without another word. Grace watched him go, her heart pounding with fear. She thought this silence meant the end. She believed that by morning, she would be asked to leave the mansion, carrying her child with nowhere to turn. She whispered to her baby, "We'll find a way. We always do." But her eyes filled with tears as she held him tighter. Meanwhile, the billionaire returned to his large, luxurious room. But that night, for the first time in years, he could not sleep. The image of Grace curled on the floor with her baby burned in his mind. He lay in his king-sized bed, covered with thick blankets, but he felt no comfort. He thought about the many empty rooms in his mansion, the wealth that surrounded him, and the fact that under the same roof, a child had no bed to sleep in. He thought about Grace's face, filled with fear and dignity at the same time. As the night stretched on, he realized something important. He had all the riches the world could offer, yet in that single moment, he had seen more love and strength in a poor maid's arms than in all the wealth he owned. It made him question himself, his choices, and the life he had built. When the morning light broke through the windows, Grace rose as she always did, hiding all traces of her night on the floor before beginning her chores. She carried her baby on her back, tying him close so she could work. Her face showed calmness, but her heart carried fear. She expected to be called at any moment and told to leave. She whispered silent prayers under her breath, hoping for mercy. The billionaire, however, watched from a distance. He did not speak yet, but in his heart, a decision was already forming. He had seen something that could not be unseen. The quiet cry of a baby in the night had woken not only his ears but also his soul. Something in him had changed, and soon, that change would alter Grace's life in ways she could not even imagine. The morning passed slowly for Grace. Every step she took around the mansion was heavy, not from the chores themselves but from the worry in her heart. She polished the grand hallway, wiped the shining tables, and carried trays back and forth, but her mind kept replaying the night before. The image of the billionaire standing in the corner, watching her as she slept on the floor with her baby, refused to leave her thoughts. His eyes had not been angry, but she had no way of knowing what they truly meant. Was he disappointed? Was he upset that she had turned a corner of his mansion into her shelter? She feared the worst. By noon, her nerves grew even tighter. One of the supervisors came to her and said the master of the house wanted to see her in his study. Grace felt her knees weaken. She looked down at her baby, tied securely against her back, and whispered softly, "Whatever happens, I'll be strong." She fixed her shawl, wiped her hands, and walked toward the study with her head bowed. The billionaire's study was a place she had never entered before. The large wooden doors opened with a creak, and she stepped inside quietly. Books lined the walls from floor to ceiling, and the smell of leather and polished wood filled the air. The billionaire sat behind a wide desk, his face calm but serious. He looked up when she entered, and for a moment, the room was filled with silence. Grace lowered her head. "Sir, I'm sorry," she said quickly, her voice trembling. "I did not mean to break any rules. Please, don't take away my job. This is the only way I can feed my child." Her words rushed out, filled with fear. She clutched her shawl tightly, her heart pounding as she waited for his response. She expected anger, maybe even harsh orders to leave immediately. Instead, the billionaire leaned back in his chair, his eyes never leaving her face. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" he asked softly. Grace blinked, surprised. She hesitated before speaking. "Because I was afraid," she admitted. "I thought if I said I had nowhere else to stay, they would dismiss me. I didn't want pity. I only wanted to work and keep my child safe." Her voice cracked as she said the last words. She tried to remain composed, but the weight of her struggles pressed down on her. She quickly wiped away the tear that escaped her eye, hoping he did not notice. But he did. He noticed everything. The billionaire leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. His tone was not harsh, but thoughtful. "How long have you been sleeping there?" Grace swallowed hard. "Since I started working here," she whispered. "Every night, after the others leave." Her honesty filled the room with silence again. The billionaire looked at her for a long moment, as though trying to understand the strength it must have taken for her to endure so much in silence. He thought about the many empty rooms in his mansion, each one filled with warmth and comfort, while this woman and her child had been lying on a cold floor, unseen and unheard. "Do you think it is right," he asked slowly, "for you and your baby to live like this, while working under this roof?" Grace lowered her head even more. "No, sir. But I didn't see another choice." The billionaire sighed, leaning back in his chair again. For the first time in years, he felt words fail him. He had made decisions worth millions in a single day without hesitation, but here he was, struggling with emotions he could not quite name. Her dignity in the face of hardship, her quiet strength, and the love she carried for her child, it all stirred something deep in him. "Look at me," he said gently. Grace slowly lifted her eyes. "You are not in trouble," he said. His voice was calm, but firm. "I am not going to take away your job. But I cannot ignore what I saw last night. No one under this roof should have to sleep on the floor with a child." Grace's lips parted in surprise. She had expected punishment, but instead, his words carried kindness. For a moment, she felt a rush of relief, but doubt still lingered. Was he simply being polite before sending her away? She clutched her child closer, afraid to hope too much. The billionaire stood up and walked to the large window behind his desk. He looked out at the vast gardens outside, his hands clasped behind his back. "Do you know what I thought when I saw you last night?" he asked after a pause. Grace shook her head. "I thought about my own life," he said quietly. "I have everything: wealth, houses, comfort. But I saw you lying there, holding your baby, and I realized something. You have something money cannot buy. You have strength. You have sacrifice. You have love. And yet, you were living in silence, carrying burdens you should not carry alone." His words filled the room with a heavy calm. Grace felt tears rising in her eyes again, but she tried to hold them back. She did not want to cry in front of him, though her heart was overwhelmed. He turned back to her. "From today, things will change," he said firmly. "You will not sleep on the floor again. I will make sure you and your child have proper rooms, with a bed, warmth, and everything you need." You are not alone in this house anymore. Grace gasped softly, unable to hide her shock. She stared at him, trying to understand if she had heard correctly. For so long, she had lived without expecting kindness, only surviving each day as it came. And now, here was a man of unimaginable wealth, offering her something she had not dared to dream of: dignity, comfort, and safety for her baby. She fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. "I don't know how to repay this. You don't know what it means to me." The billionaire stepped forward quickly, lifting her gently by the arm. "No," he said firmly. "Don't kneel. You are not less than anyone in this house. Stand tall. Your worth is not measured by the work you do or the money you have. It is measured by the love and strength you carry inside you. And I saw that last night." Grace stood, though her hands trembled. Her baby stirred softly against her back, and she pressed her cheek against his tiny head. For the first time in years, she felt hope blossom inside her heart. The billionaire returned to his desk and pressed a small bell. Within moments, one of the supervisors entered. He gave clear instructions that Grace and her child should be moved into a proper room immediately, one with a bed, a crib, and all the essentials. The supervisor looked surprised but quickly nodded and left to make the arrangements. Grace could hardly believe what was happening. She followed the billionaire out of the study, her eyes wide with disbelief and gratitude. Every step she took felt lighter, as though the burden she had carried for so long was finally being lifted. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: her life, and her child's life, had just changed forever. The news of what had happened in the study spread quietly among the household staff. At first, they were confused when the supervisor came rushing through the servants' quarters, instructing others to prepare a furnished room for Grace and her child. It was not an ordinary request. Usually, the rooms for staff were simple and small, nothing close to the richness of the mansion's other spaces. But this time, the instructions were different. A proper bed was brought in, clean sheets and warm blankets laid out, and even a small crib appeared, carefully placed by the window. Grace stood in the hallway, holding her baby, hardly able to believe her eyes. She had lived with nothing for so long that seeing a room filled with comfort felt like walking into a dream. The carpet beneath her feet was soft, the curtains flowed gently with the breeze, and the sight of the little crib made her heart ache with joy. She laid her child down inside it, watching him rest in comfort for the very first time. For a moment, she covered her face with her hands and cried, not from sadness but from relief so powerful that it shook her whole body. The billionaire had quietly followed behind, standing at the doorway. He did not say much. He simply watched as Grace walked around the room, touching the blankets and holding onto the crib as though it might vanish if she let go. The gratitude in her eyes spoke louder than any words could. He felt something inside him soften, something that had long been buried beneath the weight of wealth, schedules, and endless meetings. He had always lived in a world of contracts and numbers, but now, for the first time in years, he felt connected to something real. The next morning, the staff gathered, whispering about the change. Some were amazed by the billionaire's decision. A few of them, used to the strictness of the mansion, worried that it might create tension. But most of them admired the gesture. They had seen Grace's struggles, though she had tried to hide them. They knew how hard she had worked despite her quiet pain. Now, they saw her walk with her head a little higher, her steps a little lighter, and her eyes filled with hope. The billionaire, too, seemed changed. His usual routine of long business calls and endless meetings was interrupted by thoughts of the maid and her child. He began asking questions he had never asked before. Were the workers being treated fairly? Did they have what they needed? Were there things he could change to make life better for those who served under his roof? These were not the kinds of questions he had ever considered in the past, but now they mattered deeply to him. One evening, as Grace was finishing her duties, he called her again to the study. She entered, her baby now resting peacefully in the room provided for them. She stood with respect, her hands folded in front of her. "Are you settling in well?" he asked. "Yes, sir," Grace replied softly, her voice filled with sincerity. "I cannot thank you enough. My child sleeps peacefully now. I feel human again." Her words touched him. He nodded slowly, then leaned back in his chair. "Tell me, Grace," he said after a pause, "what do you dream of? Beyond this house, beyond the work, what do you want for yourself, and for your child?" The question stunned her. No one had asked her this in years. She lowered her eyes, thinking carefully. Finally, she whispered, "I dream of giving him an education. A chance to grow in a world where he is not limited by the struggles I faced. I want him to have opportunities I never had. That is all I ask for." The billionaire studied her face. There was no greed in her voice, no hidden request for riches. Only a simple dream of a better future for her child. It humbled him. "Then that is what we will work toward," he said firmly. "You will not remain only as a maid. I will arrange classes for you, if you wish, so you can learn more skills. And your child, he will grow with every opportunity possible. This house will be a safe place for both of you, until you are ready to stand on your own." Grace's eyes filled with tears again. She bowed her head, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Sir, I don't know why you are so kind to me. But I promise, I will work hard. I will not waste this chance." The billionaire felt a quiet warmth inside him as he listened. It was not about kindness, he realized. It was about responsibility. He had been given much in life, but what good was wealth if it did not make a difference in the lives of others? He knew that helping her was not charity, it was justice, something she had earned with her strength and her sacrifices. Days turned into weeks, and Grace's life slowly transformed. She no longer hid in corners, no longer shivered on the cold floor. Her baby grew stronger, smiling more often, his little hands reaching for the toys the staff had gifted. Grace herself looked healthier, her cheeks filled with color, her smile returning little by little. She continued to work with the same dedication as before, but now there was light in her eyes, a hope that carried her through each day. The billionaire often found himself watching from afar. He was not a man who smiled easily, but when he saw the baby laugh or Grace humming happily while she worked, a small smile would touch his lips. It reminded him that life was more than business meetings, more than money earned or lost. It was about people, about connections, about humanity. Some evenings, he would stop by the nursery to see the child sleeping peacefully in the crib. He would stand quietly, not wanting to disturb, but he would feel a strange sense of peace in those moments. For years, he had filled his house with treasures, but none of them had ever brought him the kind of warmth he felt when he saw a baby resting safely under his roof. Grace never forgot where she came from. Even as her life improved, she remained humble, always thanking the staff who showed kindness, always working with the same care and effort as before. She did not let comfort make her forget the struggles she had endured. Instead, it made her more determined to keep moving forward, not only for herself but for the little boy whose future now seemed brighter than ever. The turning point in her life was not just about a bed or a room, it was about dignity. For the first time, she felt seen, valued, and respected. And the billionaire, in giving her that, had discovered something in himself as well. He realized that wealth was not meant to be locked away but shared, not meant to separate people but to lift them. And so, the mansion that had once felt distant and cold began to change. It was no longer just a place of riches and business deals. It became a place where kindness grew, where a young mother could hope again, and where a child could sleep without fear. Time passed, and the days in the mansion no longer felt as heavy as they once had for Grace. The walls that once seemed too tall and cold now felt less like barriers and more like shelter. Each morning, she woke to the sight of her child sleeping peacefully in a soft crib, his tiny face calm and full of dreams. For Grace, This was more than comfort, it was a gift she had prayed for in silence during the darkest nights of her life. Her work continued, but her steps had changed. Where once she moved with quiet fear, now she carried herself with dignity. She polished the floors, dusted the grand furniture, and served meals with the same care as always, but her spirit was lighter. She no longer lived in shadows, no longer hid her baby as though he were a burden. Instead, she held him proudly, letting his laughter echo in the halls when she had moments free from her duties. The billionaire, too, was not the same man he had been before that night. His wealth had always been his shield, a wall between himself and the rest of the world. But now, he saw his mansion differently. He began noticing the people who worked there, the faces that had blended into the background of his busy life. He asked questions about their families, their needs, their dreams. He started making changes quietly, ensuring their living conditions were better, their pay fairer, their efforts acknowledged. The mansion became not just a place of work but a place of respect. Grace's transformation was the most visible of all. With the billionaire's support, she began learning new skills. Tutors came to the mansion to teach her reading, writing, and basic accounting. At first, she felt shy, unsure if she was capable of learning after so many years of surviving without education. But each time she wanted to give up, she looked at her baby and found strength. Slowly, her confidence grew. She could write her name with pride, read simple books, and even manage small tasks that once felt impossible. Her baby grew stronger each day. He learned to walk along the wide hallways, his small footsteps echoing against the marble floors. The staff adored him, often stopping their work to smile or play with him. The billionaire, though he remained a man of few words, would sometimes pause his busy day just to watch the child laugh. The sight of innocence and joy reminded him of something he had long forgotten, that life's true riches were not measured in gold or property but in moments of love and connection. One afternoon, as Grace folded linens in the servants' quarters, the billionaire entered quietly. She stood quickly, lowering her head in respect, but he gestured for her to sit. "You've worked hard, Grace," he said, his voice steady. "I've been watching your progress. You are not the same woman I saw that night on the floor. You've grown stronger, more confident. I am proud of you." Her eyes filled with tears, and she whispered, "I only did what I had to, sir. For my child." He shook his head gently. "You did more than that. You showed me something no amount of money could teach. You reminded me that humanity, kindness, and love are worth more than anything I own. You changed the way I see my life." His words humbled her. She had never thought of herself as someone who could change a powerful man's heart. She had only fought to survive, to keep her baby safe. And yet, through her struggle, she had touched something deeper than she ever imagined. Seasons changed, and the bond between the billionaire, Grace, and her child grew quietly but steadily. It was not a bond of master and servant, but of people connected through compassion and respect. Grace continued to work, not because she was forced to, but because she wanted to honor the trust given to her. The billionaire continued to support her, not out of duty, but out of genuine care. As the child grew, plans for his future began to take shape. The billionaire ensured that when the time came, he would attend the best schools. He promised Grace that her son would never lack the chance to dream, to rise above the hardships she had endured. Grace often lay awake at night, not on the cold floor anymore but in a warm bed, thinking about how far she had come. She would look at her child sleeping peacefully and whisper, "You will have the life I never had. You will be free." The staff in the mansion also felt the change. The atmosphere was different now, warmer, kinder. They no longer felt invisible, for the billionaire had started to see them as people, not just workers. They admired Grace, seeing in her story a symbol of resilience and hope. She had become an example that no matter how dark the road, light could find its way through. One evening, the billionaire stood by the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Grace joined him quietly, holding her baby in her arms. For a moment, they stood in silence, the breeze carrying the faint sound of laughter from the gardens. "You know," the billionaire said softly, "when I first saw you on that floor, I thought I was only witnessing poverty. But I was wrong. What I saw was strength. What I saw was love powerful enough to survive in silence. That moment changed me." Grace looked down at her baby, then back at him. "And your kindness changed me," she said gently. "It gave me hope again. It gave my child a chance to live with dignity." Their eyes met, and though they came from worlds so different, in that moment they understood each other perfectly. It was not about wealth or status anymore. It was about humanity, about the power of seeing someone else's struggle and choosing to act with compassion. In the months that followed, Grace continued to grow, her child continued to thrive, and the billionaire continued to change the way he lived. The mansion was no longer just a symbol of riches. It was a place where a maid's tears turned into smiles, where a child's cry became laughter, and where a man who once lived only for wealth discovered the deeper meaning of life. Grace never forgot the nights she spent on the cold floor. They became a memory she carried, not with shame, but with pride, because those nights showed her strength. And whenever she looked at her child sleeping peacefully in a warm bed, she knew that her sacrifices had been worth it. The billionaire, too, carried that memory. It reminded him every day of the night he followed a cry and found not weakness, but courage. It reminded him that wealth had no true value if it did not touch lives. And so, he lived differently from then on, more aware, more compassionate, more human. Their lives had been woven together by chance, but what grew from that chance was something lasting. It was not just a story of struggle and wealth. It was a story of dignity, kindness, and transformation. It was proof that even in the coldest of places, warmth could be found when hearts chose to see each other. And so, Grace no longer feared the future. She no longer felt invisible. She stood tall, her baby in her arms, ready to face whatever life would bring. Because she knew now that even the smallest act of compassion could change a life, and in her case, it had changed 2 lives forever.